The clinic on Camelback Road did a maintenance window every Wednesday from midnight to 4, and for about 8 months I was the guy who showed up alone to run it. Nothing exciting. Calibration passes, phantom scans, coil checks, log the drift, go home before sunrise. It was a Siemens-era 1.5 Tesla, installed maybe 6 years before I started there. Private ortho and neuro imaging place off Camelback, one of those quiet strip developments with a chase bank on one end and a smoothie place on the other. The waiting room had beige leather chairs that squeaked when you shifted your weight and a fish tank up front that someone had stopped cleaning around Christmas. By March, the water had gone the color of weak tea. The night this happened was the second Wednesday in March. I remember because I'd stopped at the Circle K on 24th for a Red Bull, and the guy behind the counter had a small TV playing Suns highlights. Booker had gone off. I remember thinking about that on the drive over, and about the AC in my truck making a new noise I didn't like. Not about anything else. I badged in through the back service door at 11:52. The building has that specific after-hours hospital smell, cold air and floor wax, and a faint ghost of the coffee somebody had brewed at 4 in the afternoon. I turned on the corridor lights one section at a time as I walked, because the main breaker for the whole hallway is behind a locked panel I don't have a key to. The MRI suite is at the end. Heavy shielded door, strong magnetic field placard, the whole deal. Control room sits behind glass on the left. I did the usual walkthrough, checked the helium boil-off log on the wall, glanced at the chiller, popped my head into the scan room to make sure nobody had left anything ferrous inside. Cleaning crew had been through, floor still slightly tacky, the bore was empty. Table was retracted, drawn all the way back to its home position. I set up for the standard phantom sequence. There's a plastic cylinder full of gel we use for QA. You strap it to the table, run it into the bore, and fire off a fixed protocol so you can compare the numbers to last week's numbers. 10 minutes of work, and mostly you sit in the control room and read your phone. First scan came back clean. Signal to noise inside spec, geometric distortion normal. Second one same. On the third pass, I was scrolling through my phone, half listening to the gradient knock through the wall, that dull, rhythmic hammering you stop hearing after about a month on the job. The console chimed. I glanced up. There was a person in the image. Not the phantom. The phantom was there too, off to one side where I'd strapped it in. But laid out beside it, taking up most of the bore, was a human shape. Full body, head, torso, arms, legs, cross-sectional slices, the way MRI shows you. I could see the outline of a jaw, vertebrae, the dark blocks of lungs. I sat there for a while. I don't know how long. Long enough that the console screen went into screensaver and I had to bump the mouse. My first thought was that I'd loaded an old patient study by mistake. That happens sometimes if you click the wrong workflow. I checked. New study, tonight's date, my login. Serial number matched the machine. Second thought was hardware. Coil malfunction, RF leak, something bleeding in from outside. Except the shape wasn't noise. Noise looks like noise. This was anatomically correct. You could count ribs. I went into the scan room. The bore was empty. The phantom was where I'd left it, red strap and all. I ran my hand along the inside of the tube, which is a stupid thing to do, but I did it. Cold plastic. Nothing. I stood there with my palm still against the wall of the bore and felt very aware of how quiet the room was. The chiller hummed through the floor. My own breathing. I went back to the console and started a new sequence. Same protocol. I stood over the monitor while it ran, arms folded, being professional about it. The gradients did their knocking. 90 seconds later, the first slices came up. Phantom. Just the phantom. I laughed a little, out loud, in an empty room, which I only mentioned because I remember hearing myself and thinking that was a weird sound to make. I told myself it had been a reconstruction glitch, something in the buffer. I'd write it up in the shift log and forget about it. I ran one more, for luck. The figure was back. Different position this time. In the first set, it had been flat on its back, arms at its sides, the way people lay for a study. This time it was on its side, knees drawn up a little, one arm folded under the head like a person curled up to sleep on a couch. I want to explain what that does to you, because from outside it probably sounds like nothing. It's a picture on a screen, but the machine had just told me, 30 seconds earlier, that the bore was empty, and now it was telling me the bore contained a person who had moved. Not glitched, not shifted a pixel. Moved. The way you move in your sleep when you're getting comfortable. I stood up and looked through the glass into the scan room. From the control room you can see straight down the axis of the bore, right into the tunnel. It's lit inside, dim blue. Nothing in there. I could see the phantom on the table and the empty tube around it, and the beige tile floor beyond, and the far wall with its warning signs. And no person. Nothing. I turned back to the console. The screen still had the image. The figure was still there. I zoomed in on the head. The face was in profile in that slice, and the profile had features: a nose, the soft curve of a lip, eyelids closed the way people close them when they sleep, not when they're pretending. I didn't touch anything for a long time. Then I did what any tech would do. I copied the DICOM files, all 3 sets. I copied them onto the local drive, and then, because I had a bad feeling I would want them later, and didn't trust the network, I copied them to a personal USB stick I kept in my bag. I locked the console. I did not run another scan. I sat in the control room until 3:40. I did not go back into the scan room. Chiller humming through the floor. Room cold enough that my hands got stiff. Somewhere around 3, the fluorescents in the hallway did that little dip they do when a compressor kicks on elsewhere in the building, and I felt every hair on my forearms go up. Nothing else happened. Nothing else needed to. At 3:41, I logged out, wrote "Cue a sequence anomaly, images retained for review" in the shift log, and walked back down the hallway, turning the lights off behind me one section at a time. In the parking lot, the air had that specific March desert coolness, dry and cutting. I sat in my truck for a minute before I could put the key in. At home, I looked at the files again on my laptop. They were the same. The figure was there in 1 and 3, absent in 2, in different postures. I didn't sleep. In the morning, I drafted an email to Siemens, to the field service engineer we had a contract with. I kept it dry. Repeatable artifact during QA sequence, appears consistent with anatomical structure, occurs intermittently, images attached. I did not use the word person. I did not use the word body. I said structure. I sent it before I could talk myself out of it. The engineer flew in from Malvern the next Wednesday. His name was Peter. Older guy, gray beard, the calm of someone who has looked at a lot of broken machines. He spent about 6 hours in the scan room with the covers off, ran his own diagnostics, checked the gradient coils, the RF chain, the shim, asked me to reproduce it. I ran the sequence 3 times with him watching. All 3 came back clean phantom, nothing else. We sat in the control room afterward and he pulled up my saved images on his laptop. He looked at them for a long time. Then he said, "Magnetic field artifact. Rare one. We see it maybe once every couple of years, usually in installs near heavy industrial power draw." He pulled up a technical document and turned the screen so I could see it. Diagrams, waveforms, a name for the phenomenon that I don't remember now. Something about induced signal in the receive chain during a specific gradient sequence, mimicking anatomical geometry. He walked me through it, patient and professional. The explanation was good. It was better than good. It covered the shape, the intermittency, the anatomical detail. He printed it out and left me a copy. I nodded a lot. I thanked him. I said it made sense. I sat with the printout in the control room after he'd gone, and I opened the 3 images on my own laptop and looked at them side by side. First on the back, arms straight, second empty, third on the side, one arm folded under the head. Peter's document said a lot of things. It didn't say why an artifact would change position between scans. It didn't say why an artifact would look like it had gotten more comfortable. I finished my shifts through the end of the contract, another 6 weeks. I ran the QA sequence every Wednesday. It never came back. Whatever it was didn't do it again for me. The USB stick is in a drawer with old tax receipts. I haven't opened those files in about a year. I know what's on them. The order came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and everything about it looked clean. PO number, deposit already cleared, rush tag, the whole thing routed through our regular intake portal like 100 other jobs that week. I remember because I was eating a cold slice of Immos in the break room, and the little notification chime on the production terminal went off, and I had to jog back to the floor with the crust still in my hand. I ran night shift at a commercial print shop off Manchester Road in St. Louis West Side, close enough to the interstate that you could hear freight trucks changing gears if the loading dock door was open. November of 2021. Nobody wanted to work overnights back then. Half the day, guys had quit during the pandemic and never come back, and my boss, Ray, was pulling favors just to keep the presses turning. He offered me an extra $3 an hour to run solo from 10 to 6, and I took it because I was behind on rent, and my girlfriend at the time was talking about moving in, and I didn't want her to see the numbers in my checking account. Solo means solo. 1 guy, 1 floor, 3 presses, a bindery I wasn't supposed to touch, and a rolling coffee cart that I refilled every couple of hours whether it needed it or not. The building was cinder block and steel, painted that flat industrial cream that turns yellow under sodium lights. Big enough that when you walked from the offices in front to the loading bay and back, your footsteps echoed and then died out like they'd been swallowed. I liked it most nights. It was quiet in a way apartments never are. Anyway, the order. Client name was something generic. Meridian Solutions or Meridian Services, I don't remember exactly. Small company, one of those LLC sounding names that could mean anything from tax prep to landscaping. The job ticket said, internal forms, single-sided, ivory stock, 24 pounds, quantity 500. Nothing about the client I hadn't seen before. We printed for lawyers, mortgage brokers, small government contractors, medical billing outfits. Boring paper, the kind of stuff that pays the bills. I pulled the file off the FTP drop and opened it in the pre-flight software, looked at the proof on the monitor. Standard letter size layout, single color, black ink. Some kind of certificate template with fields for name, date, place, and a header at the top. I didn't bother reading because you learn pretty fast that reading client files is a good way to lose an afternoon and gain a headache. My job was to check bleed, resolution, color profile, and page count. That's it. If the client wanted to print a menu for a restaurant that didn't exist, that was their money. I loaded the ivory stock into the Heidelberg, warmed her up. The rollers make this specific sound when they first start moving, sort of a slow leather creak that turns into a hum once the ink starts pulling through. I always liked that sound. I set the run for a proof of 20 before the full 500, because that's protocol on any first-time client, and I hit start. First sheet came out about 2 minutes later. I picked it up off the delivery tray with the back of my hand so I wouldn't smudge it, and I walked it over to the inspection light. Then I stood there for a minute because it was a birth certificate, not the fancy keepsake kind you buy at a hospital gift shop, the real kind. State seal in the corner, the specific typeface they use for the field labels, the little watermark stripe down the left side that you're supposed to be able to feel with your thumb. All of it. Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services, Bureau of Vital Records, across the top. I remember I laughed, not because it was funny, because my brain hadn't caught up yet, and laughing was the first thing it did while it tried to. I thought, okay, somebody's making a novelty gift. Somebody's doing a prop for a play, or a movie shoot, or a museum exhibit. That happens. Not often, but it happens. We'd done fake newspapers for a college theater department the year before. I set it down and picked up the next one. Different name in the field, different date, different county. I flipped through the rest of the 20, all different, all formatted the same, some with mother's maiden name filled in, some blank, a couple with what looked like real hospital names in the appropriate field, one from Cape Girardeau County, one from Jackson, one from somewhere I didn't recognize. The dates range from the 70s to the mid-90s. Adults, all of them. Nobody making a prop needs 20 different fake birth certificates with 20 different names and 20 different counties. I put the stack down on the inspection table and walked back to the terminal, pulled up the file again, looked at it properly this time. There was a second folder in the drop I hadn't opened, labeled just REF. I clicked it and it was reference scans, high-resolution scans of what looked like a real certificate, presumably somebody's, that they'd used to match the paper texture and the ink density. I could see the annotations, little arrows and callouts. Match this weight. Watermark bleed here. Seal placement 3/8 inch from edge. Somebody had done homework. I sat down in the chair at the terminal and I felt my hands doing that thing where they get cold from the fingertips backward. The press behind me was still running, still spitting out sheets onto the tray because I hadn't stopped it. I could hear the count clicking up. 19, 20. It hit the pause it was supposed to hit for the proof review, and the floor got quiet again, and I just sat there. I want to say I figured it out fast. I didn't. I sat in that chair for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, going through every other explanation I could think of. Prop house, state contract we didn't know we had, some weird archival project. My brain kept trying to hand me an exit, because if I was right about what this was, then somebody had used our shop, my shift, my machine to make it. And somebody had thought about that enough to run it through a legitimate-looking client account with a real PO and a paid invoice, so that when it showed up in the daily log the next morning, it would look like one more small job among 100 small jobs. That was the part that got me, honestly, not the certificates themselves. The fact that whoever set this up had counted on the shop being tired, understaffed, and running on autopilot, had counted specifically on me. I stood up and I walked over to the press and I pulled the sheets off the delivery tray, all 20. I stacked them and I put them face down on the inspection table under a piece of newsprint, like that was going to do anything. Then I went into Ray's office and I got his cell number off the little laminated card taped to his monitor and I called him. He picked up on the 4th ring, groggy. It was almost 1 in the morning by then. "You better be bleeding," he said. "Ray, I need you to come in." "What?" "I need you to come in, right now. I'm not going to say it on the phone." There was a long pause on the other end, and then I heard him sit up. He knew me. I didn't call him at night. Nobody called Ray at night unless the sprinkler system had gone off or the building was on fire. 20 minutes, he said, and he hung up. I went back out to the floor and I sat on a stool next to the press with my hands in my lap. I didn't touch the stack again. I didn't touch the terminal. I kept looking at the loading dock door, which is stupid because nobody was coming through the loading dock door, but I kept looking anyway. Ray showed up in 22 minutes wearing a Rams hoodie inside out. He walked straight past me to the inspection table, lifted the newsprint, looked at the top sheet, and put the newsprint back down. He didn't say anything for a second. Then he said, "Show me the job ticket." I showed him. He read it twice. He asked me who approved the client account, and I told him it had come through the standard intake, credit card on file, deposit cleared. He nodded like he already knew that was going to be the answer. "Call the police," he said. "Non-emergency line. Ask for a detective. Tell them exactly what you told me." I made the call from Ray's office. The dispatcher was calm about it in a way that told me she'd taken stranger calls that week. 2 officers came out first, walked through the floor with us, asked me to walk them through the file drop and the press setup step by step. They didn't touch the sheets. One of them took photos with the department camera. About an hour later, a detective showed up. Older guy, gray mustache, drank the coffee I offered him without saying thanks, which I appreciated because it meant he was busy thinking. He asked me if I could pull the payment records for the client. Ray did that from his own login. The card on file traced back to a business account under the Meridian name, and the Meridian name traced back to a registered agent address in a strip mall in Illinois, and that was as far as I heard about it that night. The detective said the account was almost certainly a shell, and that they'd been watching a group out of the Metro East that had been moving documents like this for the better part of a year. He said this like he was reading a weather report. They bagged the 20 sheets, signed a chain of custody form for them, took the reference scan folder 2 on a thumb drive and the job ticket printout, and a copy of the FTP log. The detective shook my hand before he left and told me not to talk about it. Not to my girlfriend, not to the day shift, not to anyone. I nodded. I finished my shift. I ran 2 other jobs that came through before 6, a batch of restaurant menus and a set of legal envelopes for a firm downtown. My hands stopped being cold somewhere around 4. I never heard what happened to the group. Ray told me a few months later that some indictments had come down in federal court over in Illinois, but he didn't know if it was the same case, and I didn't ask. The press ran fine after that. Same sound, same slow leather creak into a hum. I worked nights for another year before I moved on. I moved into my dorm in DC the last week of August 2022. 3rd floor, corner room, one window facing a courtyard where somebody was always vaping at 2 a.m. My roommate got there a day before me. By the time I dragged my suitcases in, her side of the room was already unpacked. Bed made with a gray comforter, a little cactus on the windowsill, a framed photo of her family angled so you couldn't quite see it from the door. She stood up when I walked in and smiled with her whole face. "Hey, you must be the other one." Her name was Marley. She was from somewhere in Ohio. Small, maybe 5 feet 2 inches, brown hair and a low ponytail, wire glasses. Everything about her seemed careful. She folded her laundry in tight rectangles. She said thank you to the vending machine. The first 2 weeks were fine. I'd braced myself for a nightmare roommate because that's what everyone at orientation warned us about. Instead, I got a girl who put her earbuds in when I was on the phone with my mom and offered me half her bagel on Sunday mornings. She went to bed by 11. She asked before turning the overhead light on. I noticed the first thing on a Thursday. I keep my desk in a specific way, a habit from home. Laptop centered, water bottle top right corner, phone charger coiled once and tucked under the lamp. When I came back from my 4 p.m. lecture, the charger was uncoiled and lying flat. Not a big deal. Could have been me in the morning, running late. I plugged in my phone and forgot about it. 2 days later, my books. I have this row of paperbacks along the back of the desk, held up by a mug I use as a bookend. I'd left them alphabetical, because I'm that person. When I sat down that night, 3 of them were switched. Not stacked wrong or knocked over. Switched, like somebody had picked them up, looked at them, and put them back in almost the right order, but not quite. I asked Marley. She was on her bed with a highlighter in her mouth, and she pulled it out and blinked at me. "Your books?" "No, I didn't touch anything." "Why? Is something missing?" I said no, nothing missing, probably me. She said, "You want me to keep an eye out?" And I said no, don't worry about it. I felt stupid for even bringing it up. The next week, it was the photos on my corkboard, 4 of them, tacked in a square. My little brother at 8th grade graduation, my dad and me at the beach in Delaware, my best friend Priya from home, and one of my dog. Wednesday I came back from the library and the dog was where my brother had been. My brother was where my dad was. It was subtle. If you didn't have the layout memorized, you wouldn't have caught it. I stood in front of the corkboard for a long time. That night I watched Marley over the top of my laptop. She was writing an essay for her poli-sci seminar, completely absorbed. Every so often she'd sigh and go back to typing. She looked like a normal person doing normal work. Then I thought about the diary. I've kept one since I was 12. Nothing dramatic. It's just where I write out things I can't say out loud yet. Stuff about my family, stuff about a guy I liked in high school who never knew, stuff about being scared I wasn't smart enough for this school. I brought it to DC in the bottom of my duffel bag and I put it under a stack of sweaters in the second drawer of my dresser. I hadn't touched it in almost 3 weeks. Been busy, and writing in it felt weirder with another person in the room. That Saturday morning, Marley went to a study group. I locked the door behind her and opened the drawer. The sweaters were fine. Under them, the diary. I picked it up, and the ribbon I used as a bookmark was between pages 40 and 41. I remembered the ribbon being at 38, which is not the kind of thing you remember unless something makes you remember. But I did remember. I'd written on the train coming down here, and the last entry ended at the top of 38, and I'd tucked the ribbon at the bottom of that page. Now it was 2 pages further in. I sat on the floor with the diary in my lap for maybe 10 minutes. My hands felt very cold and very far away. There's a specific kind of quiet that happens in a dorm on a Saturday morning, when everybody's either still asleep or already gone. I could hear the radiator ticking. I could hear somebody 2 rooms down laughing at something on their phone. I did the hair thing that night. I'd read about it once in some article. I don't even remember where. You take a single hair from your head, wet the tip, and press it across the seam of whatever you want to check. If somebody opens the drawer, the hair falls or slides. Simple. Free. I put the hair on the drawer Sunday morning before my 9 o'clock. When I got back at noon, it was on the carpet. Monday, same thing. Different hair, same drawer. Gone by the time I came back from lunch. Tuesday, I put a hair on the drawer and a second one across the pages of the diary itself, way in the back, past where anyone would have read to. Both were gone Tuesday afternoon. I could have said something. I thought about it. I sat on my bed and stared at her side of the room and imagined the whole conversation, and every version ended with her looking at me the way she'd looked at me about the books. Confused. A little hurt. I didn't touch anything. And then what? I go to the RA with a story about my hair falling out of a dresser. I needed to see it. There's a store off DuPont Circle that sells the kind of stuff parents buy for their kids' first apartments. They had a camera about the size of a matchbook, ran off its own battery, stored video on a card inside it. The guy at the counter said it was legal in DC to record video in your own room as long as there was no audio and no bathroom. I paid cash. I don't know why. It just felt like the thing to do. I set it up Thursday. Inside a shoebox on the top shelf of my closet, angled through a little gap I cut in the cardboard so the lens looked at my desk and dresser. I turned it on before my morning class and left. Lecture, lab, dining hall, library. I didn't come back until almost 9. Marley was already asleep, or pretending to be. I took the camera into the bathroom down the hall and sat in a stall and watched the footage on my phone. For the first hour and 40 minutes, nothing. Empty room, sunlight moving across the carpet. Then the door opened and Marley came in. She dropped her backpack on her bed. She went to the mini fridge and drank orange juice out of the carton, which was a small thing, but that was the part where I felt something shift in me. Then she walked over to my dresser. She opened the second drawer like she'd done it 100 times. She lifted the sweaters, took out the diary, and sat down on my bed with it in her lap. She opened it near the front. She read for a while. At one point she laughed, small and quiet, at something on the page. Then she took her phone out and started photographing the pages. Flatten the spine, hold the phone above, tap, turn the page. Flatten, hold, tap. She did maybe 15 pages that way. When she was done, she put the diary back under the sweaters exactly the way she'd found it. She smoothed the top sweater with her hand. She stood up, checked that the drawer was closed all the way, and went back to her side of the room and opened her laptop. I watched the whole thing twice. I don't remember walking back to my room. I remember the fluorescent light in the hallway outside 312 was flickering, and I remember thinking somebody should tell maintenance. I remember Marley said hey when I came in, and I said hey back, and I got in bed with my clothes on and turned to the wall. I went to the RA on Friday morning. Her name was Denise, a senior with a Fleetwood Mac poster. I brought the camera and my laptop and showed her. She watched about 30 seconds and said, okay, don't go back to your room right now. She called the residence director. By that afternoon, I had a temporary bed and a single on the 4th floor. By Monday, Marley had been moved to a different building. They said conduct process a lot and asked if I wanted to talk to a counselor, and I said no. I never saw her again. I don't know what she was doing with the photos of the pages. I've thought about it. I don't think I actually want an answer. I closed the diary that weekend. I put it in a shoebox in the back of my closet and didn't open it again. I haven't kept one since. I've tried. I've sat down with new notebooks a few times over the last 2 years, and I get maybe half a page in before I feel someone reading over my shoulder, and I close the cover and put it away. That's the part I don't talk about when this story comes up. People always want to know what happened to her, what she wanted. I don't have answers. What I know is, I used to have a place I could put things, and now I don't. And it's been 2 years, and the place hasn't come back. Thanks for watching, and I hope these stories gave you a good chill. Tell me down in the comments which 4chan story was your favorite. Also, check out the channel's other videos if you want more weird and scary stuff. Catch you later. Bye.